Welcome back to Storyova, the place where hidden memories, quiet betrayals, and the stories people never thought they would tell finally find their voice. If you enjoy deeply emotional stories about family, loyalty, and the moments that change everything, make sure you stay with us, because today's story is one that begins with love, breaks with betrayal, and ends with a woman who refuses to be forgotten. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and until recently, the quietest, most loyal soul in my house was a golden retriever named Rusty. Rusty came into my life 11 years ago on a cold November afternoon. The shelter smelled like disinfectant and wet fur, and every dog barked as if their voices alone might save them. But Rusty didn't bark. He simply sat in the corner of his cage, watching the door. The volunteer told me he had been there for almost 2 months. He doesn't bark much, she said. But he waits. For what, she didn't know. I knelt in front of the cage, and Rusty stood slowly, walked forward, and placed his paw against the bars. That was it. No barking. No jumping. Just trust. I brought him home that same day. Back then, the house was full. My husband Robert was still alive, and my son Daniel lived just 20 minutes away with his wife Melissa and their 2 children. Sunday dinners were loud and messy, and Rusty would lie under the table waiting for crumbs like a patient king among peasants. After Robert passed away 6 years ago, the house changed. The rooms grew quieter, the clocks louder. But Rusty stayed beside me through every silent morning and every long evening. He slept beside my bed. He followed me into the garden. And when grief pressed against my chest like a heavy stone, Rusty would rest his head on my knee as if he understood. People say dogs are loyal. But loyalty is too small a word for what Rusty gave me. He gave me companionship when the house felt too big. He gave me purpose when the days blurred together. And he gave me the simple comfort of knowing that even if the world forgot me, one living soul in that house would not. For years, everything stayed the same. Then Daniel started visiting more often. At first, I thought it was kindness. He brought groceries. He fixed a loose cabinet door. Melissa began calling every few days, asking if I needed help with errands. You shouldn't be alone so much, she said. It sounded caring. But kindness has a tone, a rhythm. And something in their voices felt rehearsed, like actors practicing lines. The first real crack appeared one Tuesday morning when Daniel sat at my kitchen table with a folder. Mom, he said gently, have you thought about downsizing? Rusty was lying under the table, his tail thumping softly. I like my house, I said. It's just a lot for one person. It's been a lot for 40 years, I replied. Daniel smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. We're just worried about you. Worried. That word started appearing everywhere. Melissa used it when she talked about the stairs. Daniel used it when he talked about the lawn. Even my granddaughter Lily used it one afternoon when she said, Daddy says you might move somewhere safer. Safer. Like my house had suddenly become dangerous. But I didn't move. Months passed, and life continued. Until the morning Rusty disappeared. It was a Thursday. I woke up just after 6 and walked into the kitchen to fill Rusty's bowl. But the bowl was still full from the night before. Rusty never skipped breakfast. I called his name. Nothing. The back door was closed, but the latch was loose. I stepped outside and called again. Rusty. The yard was quiet. No wagging tail. No paws on the porch. Just empty air. Panic spreads through the body like ice water. I grabbed my coat and walked the neighborhood calling his name, asking neighbors if they had seen him. No one had. By noon, my hands were shaking. So I called Daniel. Rusty is missing, I said. There was a pause. Then Daniel sighed. Mom, we were going to talk to you about that. Something in his voice made my stomach twist. What do you mean? Well, Melissa and I thought Rusty might be too much for you now. The words felt unreal. Where is my dog? Another pause. We found him a good home. For a moment I thought I had misheard. You what? Mom, listen. He needs more space. More activity. You can barely keep up with the yard. You gave away my dog? We rehomed him, Daniel corrected softly. The words sounded polished. Harmless. But the meaning was brutal. You had no right, I said. We're trying to help you. Where is he? He's with a family outside the city. They have land. I want the address. It's better if you don't, Daniel, I said, my voice shaking. Tell me where my dog is. But he wouldn't. We made the decision for your own good. Your own good. That phrase echoed through the kitchen long after the call ended. Rusty wasn't just a dog. He was the last living creature who shared my daily life. And my son had erased him like a piece of furniture. That night the house felt hollow. Rusty's bed sat beside the couch, empty. His leash hung by the door. I barely slept. And sometime around 3 in the morning, lying in the quiet darkness, something inside me changed. Grief hardened into clarity. If my son believed he could take pieces of my life without asking, then he had forgotten who raised him. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Margaret Hensley had been handling our family paperwork for over 20 years. When I told her what happened, she went silent. They did what? She asked. They gave away my dog. Did you sign anything? No, did you give permission? No, Margaret sighed. Then they had no legal authority. The words were like oxygen after drowning. What can I do? Well, she said slowly, first we confirm exactly what authority your son currently has over your affairs. That sentence made my stomach drop. What do you mean? Did you sign a power of attorney at any point? My mind flashed back 3 years earlier. Daniel had brought paperwork after Robert died. Just in case anything ever happens, he'd said. I trusted him. So I signed. Margaret's keyboard clicked softly. Then she spoke again. Yes. Daniel has limited financial power of attorney. A cold realization spread through my chest. He used that to make decisions about my property? He could attempt to. But not my dog. No, Margaret said firmly. Not your dog. For the first time in 24 hours, I smiled. Good. Eleanor, she continued carefully, if your son believes he has control over your life, we should address that immediately. Oh, we will, I said. First, I added, I'm getting Rusty back. Margaret chuckled softly. I suspected you might say that. 2 days later, a private investigator named Victor sat across from me at the kitchen table. He looked like the kind of man who noticed everything. All I need, he said, is your son's phone number and any details you have. He mentioned land outside the city. Victor nodded. Give me 48 hours. He solved it in 26. The family lived on a farm 90 miles away. They had adopted Rusty from Daniel through an online listing. To them, it was a rescue story. To me, it was theft. Victor asked if I wanted him to retrieve the dog. No, I said. I'll do it myself. The farm sat at the end of a long gravel road. When I stepped out of the car, the wind carried the smell of hay and earth. A young couple came out of the house, smiling politely. Can we help you? Yes, I said calmly. I'm here for my dog. They exchanged confused glances. Your dog? Golden Retriever. 11 years old. Named Rusty. The woman's face fell. You're Eleanor. I blinked. How do you know my name? Daniel told us? You couldn't take care of him anymore. The lie landed between us like a stone. I took a slow breath. May I see him? The man hesitated. Then he whistled. And a moment later, Rusty came running around the corner of the barn. For 1 second he froze. Then his entire body lit up with recognition. He ran toward me so fast he nearly knocked me over. His tail wagged like it might break off. I knelt down and buried my face in his fur. Hello, old friend, I whispered. The couple watched quietly. After a moment, the woman spoke. We had no idea. I know, I said gently. You believed a story. Rusty leaned against me as if making sure I wouldn't disappear again. Sight. You should take him home. So I did. But bringing Rusty back was only the beginning. Because if Daniel believed he could rewrite my life, then he had underestimated the woman who raised him. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret and I reviewed every document I had signed in the past 5 years. And what we found was illuminating. Daniel had quietly positioned himself to control several aspects of my finances. Nothing illegal. But very convenient. Convenient for someone expecting an inheritance. So we changed everything. The power of attorney was revoked. Every account was moved. And my will was rewritten. But I didn't stop there. Because if my son thought I was helpless, I intended to surprise him. 2 months later, Daniel arrived for Sunday dinner like he always did. Melissa followed behind him carrying a pie. Rusty greeted them at the door. Daniel froze. You got him back? Yes, I said calmly. How? I asked. He frowned. That family agreed? They believed the truth. Silence filled the room. Then Daniel shrugged. Well, I'm glad it worked out. But I could see the irritation in his eyes. We sat down to eat. Halfway through dinner, I slid a folder across the table. What's this? He asked, paperwork. He opened it. And his face slowly drained of color. You revoked the power of attorney? Yes. You moved the accounts? Yes. Melissa leaned forward nervously. Why would you do that? I looked at both of them carefully. Because you gave away my dog. Daniel scoffed. That's ridiculous. No, I said softly. What's ridiculous is believing you could take parts of my life without consequences. Rusty rested his head on my foot under the table. Daniel closed the folder. So what happens now? I smiled gently. Now everything belongs exactly where it should. And for the first time in months, the house felt like mine again. Because when they gave away my dog, they thought they were simplifying my life. What they didn't realize was that they were waking up the one person in this family who still knew how to fight. And I took back everything. When Daniel closed the folder that night, he tried to look calm, but I could see the tightness in his jaw. It was the same expression he had when he was 12 years old and got caught sneaking cookies before dinner. Back then, he would stand there pretending nothing had happened. Crumbs still on his lips. Some things never change. Melissa cleared her throat and tried to soften the moment. Well, she said lightly, this is all a misunderstanding, right? We were only trying to help. Rusty shifted under the table and placed his chin on my slipper. His warm breath brushed against my ankle, steady and familiar. Help, I repeated quietly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Yes, help. You've been alone for years, Mom. We thought Rusty was too much responsibility. You didn't ask. You would have said no. Exactly. The room fell silent again, for a long moment. Nobody touched their food. Then Daniel stood up and pushed his chair back. This is ridiculous, he said. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? I asked calmly. Yes. It was just a dog. Rusty lifted his head slightly, as if sensing the shift in tone. To Daniel, the sentence had been casual. Throwaway words, but something inside my chest tightened when he said it. Just a dog. I looked at him carefully. When your father died, I said slowly, do you remember the first night after the funeral? Daniel frowned, confused by the question. What does that have to do with anything? Answer the question. He sighed. Yeah, I remember. What did you do when everyone left? Daniel shrugged. I went home. Yes, I said. You went home. To your wife. Your children. Your life. My fingers drifted down to Rusty's ears, rubbing the soft fur. And do you know who stayed with me that night? Daniel didn't answer. Rusty, I said quietly. The memory came back with painful clarity. That night, the house had been unbearably silent. Every room felt wrong without Robert's voice. I had sat on the couch for hours staring at the blank television screen. Rusty had climbed up beside me, resting his head on my shoulder like a quiet guardian. He stayed there until morning. He's not just a dog, I continued softly. He's the reason I got out of bed some mornings. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. We didn't realize you felt that strongly. That's because you never asked. Daniel rubbed his temples. Fine. We made a mistake. Can we move on now? I looked at him for a long moment. To move on, such an easy phrase when you're the one who caused the damage. I already have. I said. He picked up the folder again. You changed everything. Yes. You didn't even tell us. I didn't think I needed permission. His eyes narrowed slightly. That's not fair. Fair? I said softly. You sold my dog on the internet. I didn't sell him. Rehomed him, I corrected. He exhaled sharply. This conversation is going nowhere. Melissa stood up too. Maybe we should go. They gathered their coats in silence. When Daniel reached the door, he hesitated and looked back at Rusty. The dog was lying beside my chair, perfectly calm. You're really going to hold this against us forever? Daniel asked. I tilted my head slightly. No, then what? I met his eyes. I'm simply remembering who I can trust. He didn't say anything after that. The door closed behind them, and the house fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. It felt peaceful. Rusty walked over and nudged my hand with his nose. I smiled. You did good today. I told him. He wagged his tail once and curled up beside the couch. Over the next few weeks, Daniel didn't call. Melissa sent one polite text asking how I was doing. I replied with a single word, fine, but behind the scenes, my life was shifting in ways they didn't know about. Margaret had suggested something during our last meeting. Eleanor, she said, leaning back in her chair, have you ever considered what you actually want to do with your estate? I already have a will. Yes, she said. But that will was written when your life looked very different. She wasn't wrong. When Robert was alive, everything had seemed simple. The house would go to Daniel. The savings would help the grandchildren. The family line would continue as it always had, but families change, and sometimes they reveal parts of themselves you wish you had seen earlier. What are you suggesting? I asked. Margaret smiled faintly. I'm suggesting you give yourself permission to rethink things. That sentence stayed with me for days. Rethink things. For 40 years. My life had followed a predictable path: marriage, motherhood, retirement, quiet evenings and polite holidays, but somewhere along the way, the people around me had started seeing me as fragile, temporary, like a piece of furniture waiting to be removed. Rusty snored softly beside my chair one evening as I sat at the dining table reviewing documents, and suddenly, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. If my son believed my life was already over, then he clearly had no idea how much time I still had left. So I began making decisions, real decisions. The first one was small. I hired a landscaping company to completely redesign the backyard. For years Daniel had complained that maintaining the property was too difficult for me. So I turned it into something beautiful and simple: flower beds, stone paths. A wide open Space where Rusty could run. The second decision was bigger. I sold the vacation cabin Robert and I had owned near the lake. Daniel had always assumed that cabin would eventually become his, but when I walked through it one last time, the place felt like a museum of memories rather than a home. So I sold it, and the money went somewhere unexpected. 3 weeks later, I drove Rusty to a small building just outside town. A wooden sign hung above the entrance, Silver Oak Animal Rescue. Rusty hopped out of the car and sniffed the air curiously. Inside, the place was full of barking dogs and the smell of sawdust. A young volunteer greeted me. Can I help you? Yes, I said, I'd like to make a donation. Asterisk, she smiled politely. Every little bit helps. I slid the envelope across the counter. Her smile faded as she looked inside. This is a lot. I know. Her eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? I looked down at Rusty, who was wagging his tail at a nervous little terrier in the corner. Yes, I said softly. I'm sure. The donation funded something specific. A new outdoor play yard. And when they asked what name should appear on the dedication plaque, I didn't hesitate. Rusty's Garden. When Daniel eventually found out about the cabin, he called immediately. You sold it? He asked, his voice tight. Yes. Why would you do that without telling me? I leaned back in my chair. Because it was mine. But that was part of the family property. No, I corrected gently. It was part of my life. He was silent for a moment. Then he asked the question he had really been holding back. Where did the money go? I smiled faintly. To something important. What does that mean? It means some very lucky dogs are about to get a beautiful place to run. There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. You gave it away? He finally said. Yes. You're unbelievable. I laughed softly. No, Daniel. I'm simply learning. Learning what? How to take care of what matters. He hung up shortly after that. But something interesting happened after the rescue center announced the new play yard. They posted a photo online of Rusty standing proudly beside the new fence. The plaque read, Rusty's Garden, dedicated to the loyalty that never asks for permission to love. The photo spread through the town faster than I expected. Neighbors congratulated me. People I hadn't spoken to in years sent kind messages. Even Lily called one evening. Grandma, she said excitedly, I saw Rusty online. Yes, you did. Dad looked really mad. I chuckled quietly. Well, sometimes people get upset when they realize they misunderstood something. What did he misunderstand? I glanced down at Rusty. That loyalty can't be replaced. A few days later, Daniel showed up at the house again. This time he came alone. Rusty barked once when he saw him but quickly settled down. Daniel stood in the living room looking around like he hadn't been there in years. You've changed things, he said. Some things. He noticed the new photos on the wall. Pictures of Rusty running in the garden. Photos from the rescue center. You're serious about this dog charity stuff, he said. Yes. He crossed his arms. I think you're doing all this to punish me. I shook my head slowly. No, then why? I met his eyes. Because you reminded me how easy it is to lose something you love. Rusty walked over and sat beside me. Daniel watched him for a moment. You really missed him that much? Yes. Another long silence stretched between us. Then Daniel sighed. I didn't understand. No, I agreed gently. You didn't. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to. And for the first time since the whole thing began, his voice sounded less defensive. Almost thoughtful. Rusty wagged his tail slightly. And I realized something important in that moment. Taking back my life hadn't just changed me. It had changed the way everyone else saw me too. Because when they gave away my dog, they thought they were taking control of my story. What they didn't realize was that they had just given me a reason to rewrite the ending.